Placenta encapsulation. What are the benefits and risk? Hi, I'm Susan White, certified nurse midwife, and one of the proposed benefits was some people believe that placenta encapsulation will improve mood, that it'll decrease postpartum bleeding, it'll decrease postpartum anemia, and postpartum depression, that it can reduce pain and increase milk supply and increase energy. But what does the evidence say? So, what is placenta encapsulation and how is it done? It's consuming the placenta with putting it into capsules. And how is that done? The most common method is that the placenta is frozen. It is then placed in water to be rinsed. It's stripped of the membranes and then it's cleaned and sliced. It may be steamed or it can be dehydrated raw, but it's dehydrated usually between 115 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it's ground up and placed into capsules. However, there's no uniform standards for processing. So, is there any evidence that consuming the placenta can decrease postpartum depression? Well, this was a study where they compared two groups of women who the one group consumed their placenta, the other did not, and they looked at postpartum depression screening scores. And they looked at the ones that consumed their placenta that were it was either raw or it was dehydrated at a low temperature, and that's because they believe a high temperature can destroy some of the hormones. So they believe the hormones are going to help prevent postpartum depression, in other words. So they looked at the depression screening scores between 6 and 8 weeks, and the women that consumed their placentas actually had a higher score for postpartum depression. Now, the authors don't know if that's because consuming the placenta actually increased their postpartum depression, or was it that women more prone to postpartum depression consume their placenta? They're not sure why. But we can say that from this study, it did not decrease their postpartum depression. What about evidence to prevent postpartum anemia with consuming the placenta? Well, this was a very small study, but it was a randomized controlled trial, and it looked at maternal iron stores. Comparing the one group did have encapsulated placenta that they took, and the other had a beef placebo. Nobody knew which one had which, right? The encapsulated placenta, actually, those capsules had a higher iron level than the placebo. However, when they looked at the maternal iron stores, they looked at the hemoglobin, ferritin, and transferrin. That's looking at the way to understand the iron level in those moms. It was actually the same between the two groups. It did not make any difference. What about reducing pain postpartum? Well, they've been doing animal studies and they've identified this substance called POEF, placental opioid enhancing factor, which is in the animal placentas and amniotic fluid. And the way it works is that it enhances the natural painkillers in their body. So it helps to reduce pain in those animals. But they haven't done studies yet with humans to know what the evidence is and how it works with humans at all. Now, the POEF substance that they've identified, they have figured out that it is inactive if it's heated more than 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So, if it was to work in humans, the human would have to consume that placenta raw and immediately postpartum to have any hypothetical beneficial effects. Now, here's another small study, but it was randomized and controlled, and they looked at maternal mood, bonding, and fatigue assessment scores. And one group was given, there again, the placenta capsules. The other group was given a placebo capsule that was either beef or vegetarian, and they found no statistical difference. So, there again, no benefit for the placenta capsules. Now, in that same small study that was randomized and controlled, they also looked at the effects on breastfeeding. And so they looked at the prolactin levels, that's the hormone that causes milk to be produced. And they also looked at the newborn weights, whether they're gaining weight and how much. With those two groups. And there again, the one group had the placenta capsules, if you remember, the other had the placebo capsules with either beef or vegetarian in there. And they found no statistical difference in the hormone levels of prolactin or in the baby's weight gain. It was the same. Now, there were some earlier studies that found increased milk production with the placenta consumption, but nowadays, when they look back at those studies, they feel like that they had some design flaws in the research, so they're not really convinced that those were studies that were very helpful. Now, also, the other thing to think about is when you think about breastfeeding, for breastfeeding to work well, once mom delivers, the hormones in the placenta, once the placenta is delivered, those are going to go down, and that's your estrogen and progesterone. So, nature has intended for those hormone levels to drop suddenly after delivery, and that actually allows the milk production to begin. And so it's kind of counterintuitive that thinking that taking those hormones could help lactation because it actually works in reverse. Now, is there any evidence from anthropology? Some have claimed that ancient cultures consumed their placentas. However, anthropologists have looked at this and researched it, and that is really not true because most cultures considered it to be taboo to eat the placenta. It was considered like cannibalistic. Now, there were rare exceptions, like if there was a famine, disaster, starvation. You could even look at the Bible. There was examples where like a city was under siege and everyone was starving to death, and they resorted to cannibalism and placenta consumption. Now, also, there are claims about it being used in Chinese medicine, which that is true, except that it was not specifically given to the postpartum mother. It was used for other uses as well. Is there any evidence of any risk with consuming the placenta or placenta capsules? So there is a risk of infection. There is a potential that pathogens can be transmitted, whether it's bacterial, viral, or fungal, if they're present in the placenta. And you have to have adequate heating to eradicate those. And especially viruses, there has to be a high enough temperature. For example, we have on here hepatitis A has got to be heated up to 158 degrees for 4 minutes to eradicate that. And then HIV has to be heated to at least 133 degrees. So it depends on the processing and how that's done. If those temperatures are not met, then you do have that risk of transmission of disease. When looking at the risks, there are just a couple case studies that we can consider. There was a breastfed infant whose mother was taking the placental capsules, and the baby had to be treated for group beta strep infection, the early onset type, and then was sent home and then had to be readmitted to the hospital again and treated for late onset group beta strep infection. And when they researched it, they found that the strain of group beta strep that the baby had matched the exact strain that was in the dehydrated placental capsules. And so the authors of that case study did believe that the infection was due to improper sterilization during the encapsulation process. Now, there was another interesting case study of a 3-month-old breastfed infant who was having breast budding and vaginal bleeding, and those symptoms did resolve when the mother quit taking the placenta capsules. Okay, so where does that leave us? So, per the current research, which of course some of those are very small studies and we need more research, but to date, to this point, many of the proposed benefits look like they're being disproven. Okay, and then we still have that risk of infection being transmitted through the placenta depending on how it's processed. All right, in the description, you'll find a link to all of my references for this presentation, and also you'll find a link to my childbirth education classes where you can learn more and be prepared for childbirth. Thanks.